are back with Hydromel 2022.
So it's been 15 days, let's get a reading. Find out what it's doing. It's probably done, but we don't know until we actually check it, and that's the real reason for using a hydrometer. All right, so I filled up the graduated cylinder, put in the hydrometer, and it's reading right at, that's 1.000 as far as I'm concerned. There's just no, I mean, it's either 999 or 1.000, either way. Now, normally I would say, wait a week, check it again, make sure it's done. Being that it already went to dry, which is where I expect it to be, I'm thinking it's safe to rack, okay? That is a judgment call. If this was at 1.010, I wouldn't be doing this. If this was anything above 1.00, I wouldn't be doing this. If this was a higher gravity must, I probably wouldn't be doing this because it could go a little bit lower. But for this, it works just fine. So we're gonna rack this into another container to get all the lees to go away, and hopefully it'll clear out a little bit, so let's get to that. As always, when we're racking, you have your source and your destination, and we use an auto siphon. This time we're gonna leave the cap on it because there is some lees in the bottom that we don't want in here. So, airlock comes off, source stays up, destination goes lower, end tube goes in destination. This part goes in source, halfway. Just halfway. Use as few strokes as possible to get the siphon going. Okay, so we racked it. We've also put the airlock back on because that's just good practice. When you keep it in conditioning phase or secondary, it's not really secondary fermentation. There's no fermentation happening anymore. It's more just to clear out because you see how it's a little bit cloudy. We want that to clear. But we have some wastage here. Now this is lees, okay? Can this be reused? Sure. We don't do it because it's not as consistent or reliable. You don't necessarily know what you're gonna get the second time around. I know people that do it, they have great luck with it. We've tried it and had less than stellar results, so we don't do it on camera. But people are always trying to come up with ways to reduce the amount of wastage that you get when you rack, and that's perfectly fine. You can totally try to do that. We got that much, which probably comes to about 2, maybe 3 ounces of liquid. Does that suck? A little bit, yeah, I will admit it, but it's part of the hobby. Can I take this and put it into the fridge and cold crash it and try to get those extra last couple out? Sure I can. However, in our case, we just move forward and don't worry about those couple ounces. I know it sounds really weird because we're usually pretty frugal about things, but in this case, those couple ounces are just more trouble to me than they're worth in the end. We got plenty of product here. We don't have too much headspace. It's all good. Everything about this is working as planned so far. So what are we gonna do with this now?
We're gonna let it sit.
Till it clears. People ask all the time, how long should it sit in conditioning? A day, 2 days, 5 days, a month, 2 months? It all depends on your schedule, when you feel like racking it again or bottling it again, and how long it takes to clear. Now we are gonna carbonate this, so I don't wanna let it sit too long because we do need some of those yeast to be a little bit active. So if it sits too long, it may not carbonate well. I don't wanna give this more than probably a couple of weeks, but we'll see you then.
It's been 7 days. Let's see where we're at.
So last time it was at 1.000. We're just doing due diligence and making sure it's really done. So we waited a week and hopefully it shouldn't change. This is kind of an example of the way to do this. I'm using a syringe with some tubing. We're gonna take a hydrometer reading, just like last time. Now, the expectation is that it has not changed. It's easier with 4 hands. 3 hands works well though. Like I said, it was 1.000 before, and now it's 1.000. So that's pretty much to be expected. So the next step is we want to carbonate this, which means I'm going to put it all into a pitcher and we're going to add priming sugar. Now, this is one of those things that gets a little bit confusing. We get this question a lot. Carbonation is fermentation, okay? It's kind of like if you step feed something. You know, there's some gases already in this brew. Well, those gases are carbonation. That's very true. And some people will just try to keep some of the original carbonation and bottle it. There's nothing really wrong with that, okay? Except that the gases that are in here are primary fermentation gases. Probably not gonna be the best tasting or smelling things, where when it recarbonates, even though it's producing the same kind of gases, it's not the same. It's not, they're fresher for one, they're not as old, and it tastes a little bit different, okay? I don't know the exact scientific reason why, I just know that the primary fermentation gases you generally want to get rid of. That said, there's nothing dangerous about it. But my point is, if you try to carbonate something that is already past its alcohol tolerance of the yeast, it's not going to carbonate because it is actually a fermentation. And if you try to, oh, well, this is nice and sweet the way I like it, I'm going to carbonate it now. Well, if your fermentation was not complete, it's going to keep fermenting and probably make bombs rather than a nice sweet carbonated beverage. And if it's already past the yeast tolerance, you just made a sweet beverage sweeter and it's not going to carbonate. Make sense?
So if you want the carbonated sweet beverage, you're going to need to pasteurize.
Yes. We did a video on that about cider, but it's the same concept for cider, wine, mead, beer, all the same idea. We'll have a link to that so you can figure out how to do that. We did it 4 different ways, showing you all the different methods and why you should do each. But for now, we're gonna rack this into a pitcher and get a measurement, add our sugar, and move forward. When racking, we like to use an auto siphon. There's a lot of different ways to do it. This we found is the most economical and simplest way that has the least amount of waste, so it's the most efficient too. You take your destination and you put it lower, in our case, the seat next to Derica, and you take the source, which I am going to leave the cap on. That's this little thing here. It is not just a protective cap, it's actually there to keep lees from getting in. And I'm gonna put this about halfway into the bottle, give this just a couple of pumps, and away it goes. Let that drop to the bottom. Now I want to talk a little bit about batch size for just a moment. Every once in a while, somebody gets a little upset with us that we don't make larger batches. And they say, oh, can't you make a 5-gallon batch? Just show me how to do that. Well, you do it exactly the same way. You just multiply everything by 5. The only thing that's not multiplied by 5 is the yeast. In our case, we probably used a full packet or a half packet. When you're making 5 gallons, you use a whole packet. No big deal. Part of the reason why we don't like to make larger batches is, perfect example. Today, when Derica was going through our, what we call the bomb shelter, which is just a big tough tub to hold bottles that are carbonating, we've left some stuff in there because, well, you know, our house is small, we don't have a lot of space. Some of the bottles that are still in there were the Dunkelweizen. Now, I don't know exactly how old that beer is, but it's over a year ago, and we still have it. Why? Because we made 5 gallons of it. Very few other things are still around that long. So that's part of why we don't like to make large batches. But the gist of it is, we make a 1-gallon recipe. You wanna make 2 gallons? Multiply everything by 2. You wanna make 3? Multiply by 3. You wanna make 42 gallons? Multiply it by 42, and good luck to you. That's a crazy amount of stuff to do. But every once in a while we get that question, and it is really that simple. Just multiply it. Everything scales. We design it that way on purpose, so it's very easy for you. And my rule of thumb for yeast, below 3 gallons, use a half packet if you want to. Above 3 gallons, use 1. Some people have taken that to mean they need 2 or even 3 packets to make 5 gallons. No, that's just overkill. You're not really gonna do yourself much good adding that much more. I mean, if you wanted to do 2 packets to get a nice faster start, sure, but it's still a little bit wasteful. It just really doesn't seem to do that much.
Most commercial yeast manufacturers, particularly with the dry yeast, recommend you use 5 grams of yeast per gallon, US gallon of fermentation. So if you want to be extra super frugal, you can weigh out 5 grams.
We tried doing that.
However, in our experience, particularly when using dry yeast, which is what we use, there's a ratio in there of active yeast to expired dead yeast. And so if you limit yourself to just those 5 grams, there is a higher percentage that you may have a larger amount of dead yeast to active yeast. Now,
it's kind of a crapshoot.
Is this going to cause you problems? No, it's simply going to make a slower startup as the colony has to build up before it can really get going.
Thus, we found, use a packet, up to 5 gallons, you're good. All right, so now that it's racked, I can see, because we're using this pitcher with the raised numbers on the side. By the way, there's a link in the description for this pitcher. It's the most awesome thing ever. I know I make a big deal about pitchers, but this actually is seriously a great tool to have. It's 120 ounces, which comes to like 3,550 milliliters or so. We usually go by ounces because that's the size of our bottles. We're using 16-ounce bottles today, so that's 7.5 bottles. Now, I know that I fill the bottles a little bit more than I probably should, so it might be more like 7 bottles. But that's not the important thing that we're trying to discuss right now. Right now, I want to prime this for carbonation. This is close enough to a gallon that I'm going to use my 1 gallon standard rule, which is 1 ounce or 28 grams of sugar. Now this is white sugar. If you were using honey, you want to use a little bit more honey. If you were using brown sugar, be prepared for the molasses raw flavor that's going to come through because it is going to ferment a little bit. Not quite as clean a taste as white sugar for this purpose.
That leads me to a question that I've noticed that's been asked on the comments, and that is, why do we typically use white sugar as our carbonation sugar source versus another fermentable sugar? And that's what Brian just talked about, is that white sugar is just simply going to feed the yeast without altering the flavor of the brew. Or if you want to add the carbonation plus the flavor, then you can choose another fermentable sugar of your choice.
Yeah, you certainly can. I prefer to use white sugar because the flavors that are in here are what I want it to be already, so I'm not going to go adding different things. If I wanted to, I might add them, but not using the sugar. Like if I wanted molasses flavor, I'd just add molasses. And white sugar, which that's what brown sugar really is today. It's white, pure sugar with molasses added back to it, which is not what brown sugar is supposed to be, but that's what it is today. Anyway, another big question that comes up a lot is, how much sugar should I add to each bottle? Well, you shouldn't, okay? And here's why. If you are measuring out a spoonful of sugar in each bottle, the chances of variance of volume measurement are quite high. And a small variance is enough to overcarbonate sometimes, and that could cause a weaker bottle to explode. And if you really overdo it, it could cause even a strong bottle to explode because, like I said, it is a fermentation, does produce gases, does produce pressure. So
it could also cause a bottle that had less amount of sugar to not carbonate as well as you might want it to.
That's the other side. So one's dangerous, one's just not favorable. So to get an even amount of carbonation throughout, I like to mix the whole batch up with the sugar. Now I know it's accurate. I also used a pretty accurate scale for that 28 grams, so I know it's consistent throughout the batch, as long as I mix it up. Now I'm doing two things by mixing here. I'm degassing and mixing. We get a lot of questions about degassing. I don't make a big deal about degassing, okay? Some people go all kinds of crazy and they use a rotational thing and all that. I stir it. Are there good points to that and bad points? Yes, absolutely. If you're in a 5-gallon container, it's a little bit more difficult, I agree. For that, get the attachment for your drill and use the whip. It works just fine. It's also a great way to mix your brews. So for doing stuff like this, it works really, really well. For me, I'm not splashing, I'm not making anything crazy, but I do see some foam coming out. The sugar does create nucleation sites too, so it does help a little bit with getting some of that gas out. But I just want to make sure it's mixed, because if I don't mix it properly, the top will have no sugar, the bottom will get more sugar, and I have the same problem as if I added it to the bottles. You with me so far? But I think because I didn't add much sugar to this, and I'm looking for little grains floating around, I don't see any. We're good. By the way, this was sanitized, but just before she handed it to me, there's a drop of water right there. See, that came off that spoon. Proof. And now that we have our primed hydromel ready to go into bottles, all we have to do is bottle it. And for that, I'm going to use the bottling wand like we always do. I'm just going to stick it on the end here, about a 1/2 inch, because any more than that, it's hard to get off. Any less than that, and it pops off and makes a mess. Don't ask me how I know. Now, bottling is much the same as siphoning or racking. And all I'm going to do is, we took the cap off the end here, and I'm going to put that all the way to the bottom because it just doesn't matter anymore. And we're going to put the other end in one of the bottles, which are at a lower altitude than the liquid itself. Pretty simple. Because
we're using the bottling wand that has the springy thingy, otherwise known as the stem valve, I have to depress the bottling wand in the bottle in order for the autosiphon to function properly.
A lot of people get very frustrated because they don't press that down and they're pumping and pumping and pumping and they're like, what, this doesn't work. Well, that's why, because you have to actually have that depressed. Don't worry, it's okay. I think I did it the first time too. And just a couple pumps, get it going, let it sit, and I'll take over the bottling. See you in a few. All right, so we did actually get 7.5 bottles. Really shocking, but hey, that's how numbers work, right? So what we have, if you look, all these bottles are full to approximately the same amount, except for this one, which is the half. It's only full to about here. I'm not gonna let this one carbonate. okay? And here's why. You want about that much headspace in there. If you let this go too far down, here's what happens. Air is more compressible than the liquid, so it builds up a higher pressure, which makes the bottle more likely to explode. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but that's the way physics works. The less headspace you have, the better the carbonation. But this is pretty much the happy medium, the perfect spot. Any less than that is actually difficult to do. What I really do is I leave the bottling wand in it until it goes almost all the way to the top, then I pull it out really quick, and that leaves that much headspace because it did take up a little bit of space in there. So that works out beautifully. It also makes for nice, even looking bottles when you put them all side by side. What do we do with the one that's partial though? That one goes in the fridge or gets consumed immediately because it will start fermenting if it's left at room temperature, which means it will blow up sooner than these guys will because of higher pressure, like I said. So we want to chill that and enjoy it sooner rather than later because even in the fridge, it still could explode.
Another trick you can do when you are carbonating a beverage is you can have a tester bottle. A tester bottle is going to be a plastic bottle that you repurpose from a carbonated beverage that you purchased. You know that that plastic bottle will be able to hold carbonation, but you can also put a sample of your brew in that bottle, just fill it as you normally would, and you can give it a nice little squeeze now and then to see how much of the pressure is built up in that bottle. And once it's nice and firm, you are pretty well assured that you have an even carbonation throughout your entire batch.
While not a 100% perfect test, it is a really good way to go, especially if you're doing the pasteurization afterwards. These do not need to be pasteurized. The carbonation will stop all on its own. There's a controlled amount of sugars in here. So that's why I didn't worry about doing the tester, because in a week to 10 days or so, these will be done and it's all good. They can sit for 2 or 3 months or even a year because they're not going to carbonate any further. That's something really important that a lot of people don't seem to understand. Once there's no more sugars, fermentation stops. It's just not going to go any more than it already did. So it's only going to...
Because there's nothing more for the yeast to eat.
Right. It's going to carbonate so far and stop. And that's the end of it. So there's no reason to worry. There's no reason to hurry. Okay. We are going to give these about a week though, and we'll be back to give you a taste test. Okay. So this has been sitting in the bunker for like a week. And now is the moment of truth. Did it carbonate? I actually don't know. I did put this in the fridge though. Here's the thing. If you are carbonating something, generally speaking, you're going to drink carbonated beverages cold because that's the preference. But also, there's a good reason to chill them, and that is it keeps the carbon dioxide in solution better, so it doesn't all just spurt out all over the place. But let's find out. Oh
Yay.
yeah, we have carbonation. Beautiful. And you can even see bubbles. It's always kind of a, oh wow, it's kind of a neat thing when it works. And you never know, you know, like I know some people that just carbonation doesn't work for them. We don't really usually have much problem with it. Every once in a while it didn't work, but for the most part, it works for us. This looks like champagne.
Yep, color-wise, it looks like champagne. It's not only the bubbles that are sticking to the side of the glass,
Yeah.
but it's that pale champagne color.
Yep, it's got just a little bit of like a yellowish color. It's mostly clear, slight haze, not bad. On the smell,
It's alcohol and honey.
it's fruity and honey. Yeah, I get fruity. I get a little bit fruity on it.
Yeah, it's like a fermented fruit smell rather than true alcohol smell.
Yeah, smells nice. I would normally do a swirl. I'm not doing that because I want to keep the fizz. I'm getting a taste. It's very much like a hard cider or something like that.
It's delightful. It's light.
crisp,
It's
refreshing. Not a super strong flavor. I mean, it's a hydromel. They're usually lighter in flavor. Do get the honey character. This is dry, keep in mind. Very, very dry. It's about 5% ABV. So it's like a beer or a hard cider kind of thing. It's more like a just finished cutting the grass, middle of summer, hot and sweaty. Crack one of these open.
Yeah.
That's what this is for.
It kind of is like the in-between land of beer and soda almost.
Yeah.
Like when I was growing up, I was a huge fan of seltzer water. Flavored seltzer water was my thing. I drank it all the time. And this is kind of reminding me of that, but more towards the beer.
It's like mead flavored seltzer water.
Yeah.
It kind of is. Got a little bit of a lighter flavor. The carbonation really is nice with this. And the bit of, you know, it's cold. It's not totally cold yet because this just went in the fridge a little while ago, but it's cold enough Now I know, we normally taste everything at room temperature, but this beverage was really intended to be drank cold. So that's why we're drinking it cold.
Yeah.
Ish. I'm not hating this.
No.
I really think the carbonation helped.
Yeah.
Carbonation made this work. I'm having more.
Yeah. It's easy, for lack of a better term. You just kind of drink it and like, oh yeah, that's good.
The cool part about this is it's a base.
Yeah.
Because before we bottled this, we could have added fruit to it, we could have added other juices which could change the carbonation, so be careful doing that. But mostly, like if you added fruit to it, it's gonna change the color and the flavor. Fruit doesn't really add that much sugar for fermentation, so it wouldn't be as big of an issue. Maybe use a little bit less sugar for carbonation. We'll have to play with that.
Yeah.
But it just makes a really nice base for other flavors. You could add spices to it if you wanted to. You can do all kinds of things. You can even do it within each bottle, which is kind of interesting. Before you cap it, throw a cinnamon stick in there. Before you cap it, throw a couple of cloves in there, or allspice berries, or, you know, whatever you like. Herbs work well too because they don't add to the fermentation process.
Yeah.
Just, you know, all kinds of possibilities start coming to mind. But anyway, let me give you the travel through the palate, as it were. As it hits my mouth, the first thing that you get hit with is the carbonation, that crispness of carbonation, and almost a mild bitterness, and I think that's the CO2 in the carbonation.
Yeah.
Then I get the honey essence immediately. It's not sweet so much as you just know it's like a honey flavor. Then after that, mild, I'm not getting the fruit in the taste. Mild like floral note.
Yeah.
And then that goes back to the carbon dioxide, slight bitterness, and a nice crisp finish. It's got a really nice mouthfeel considering how light it is though. I'm actually a little bit surprised. It doesn't taste watery, it doesn't feel thin. It feels rich and full, as much as it can be, you know, because we only used like, what, 1 pound of honey to make this? I mean, it was like nothing. So if you're unsure about making mead, and you don't want to invest a lot in honey, a hydromel is a great way to get started because it gives you a foot in the door without costing a fortune. I mean, a pound of honey, even a really good quality honey, is going to cost a little bit more than the equivalent of juice. So, you know, it's a little bit more, but not tremendously so. It's not a huge investment to make a hydromel. I think that's kind of a cool way to get started.
It reminds me a lot, again, of seltzer, the sparkling waters that are that are the thing right now, because it's not strong, and the strongest flavor, as Brian mentioned, is really the carbonation, that carbonated water flavor.
With like a back note of honey and flowers.
Yeah.
It's just very nice. Really nice. Very light.
All right, so we have to move on to numbers.
Really? Are you ready? We're on to numbers?
Yeah.
Okay, so numbers. I think I need more. Well, it's one of those things, like, this is, if you're used to drinking meads, this is not exactly like drinking mead. It's more like drinking a hard cider or a beer. It's more in that realm. So,
or even a soda.
Yeah, so it's hard to judge that way. So I have to adjust my thinking a little bit. All right, I have a number. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
1, 2, 3,
6.
7.5.
Now I went low to 6, and I knew that was an abnormally low number for what I'm experiencing for this beverage. And the reason why I gave it that 6 is because part of our criteria is what would you do differently? Well, I would do tons of things differently, and Brian nailed it when he said this is a base. So as the beverage on its own is perfectly fine. I could totally see enjoying this as its own thing. So doing that, I would actually give it a much higher than a 6 number.
I see where you went.
If I had my preferences and I were to request a hydromel, I think I'd want it to be fruity. So I would want this recipe with fruit.
Yeah.
So I gave it a 6 because it's above the middle, because it's good. Mm-hmm. But yet I want more.
See, I went higher because for the same reasons, though. I think it's a 7.5 as it is. It stands alone as a 7.5. If I was to add anything to this, sweetness, fruits, anything, it would be much higher. This could go a lot higher. I feel like I could make my spiced methylene into a carbonated hydromel, and it would be like amazing. There's just so many things you can do with this, and that's why it's a 7.5 and not more. I'm not arguing your number, I'm just saying that's my reasoning. Same reason.
So as you can tell, Brian and I like to say the same thing differently.
Oh yeah,
And
all the time.
this is our life.
Constantly. We do it all the time. But anyway, if you want to get your feet wet in mead, or if you want something that's a little lighter, a little crisper, a little easier to drink, that won't, that you can drink quite a bit of, because this is like almost a third the alcohol
Yeah,
of
this
most
is
of the meads.
5%. So.
Yeah, and that's an estimated 5. That's with the carbonation. It was like 4 point something. And the carbonation adds like 0.3%. So yeah, something like that. So if you want something that's like really simple, really easy to make, and lighter, go for a hydromel. There's nothing wrong with them. They're actually really, really good. It's just a different style of mead making. And this recipe actually worked really, really well. It only took a few weeks. I think we started it March 30th. Today is May 3rd. So we're talking 5 weeks. This took 5 weeks to get to here.
For a fully carbonated beverage.
It's fantastic. So. I don't know that I would store this for super long. We're probably gonna push that because we just don't drink all that much, honestly, even though people think we do. The bottles that we have will probably sit for many months, so you might see maybe not a 1 year tasting, but like a 6 month tasting or something. I would imagine it's going to get better. The reason I don't say to store it super long is it is so low in alcohol content that it's not going to be so great for long-term storage, okay? Does that mean it's definitely going to spoil? No, but it could. And it's more likely to because of the lower alcohol content. So don't read too far into it. Just know that there's a little bit more risk when you have a lower ABV than when you have a higher ABV. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching and have a great day.
Bye-bye.